viewers, and welcome to yet another episode of Dinner Guide. I am your host, Chef Andy, and of course, before I proceed, I will take the opportunity to introduce a guest that some of you may have already seen on the show before, but I will of course allow her to say a very small word of hello before we proceed. Eunice?
Hi everyone, I'm Eunice Wairimu, and I'm very happy to be on this show yet again.
Thank you very much for joining us once more. Now on this episode, we're going to be focusing on a very simple dish, something that most people at home or even yourself may have already done at home, which is a very simple goat biryani. And I'll of course begin the process by introducing the ingredients that we'll be working with, beginning at the front with about 6 or 7 cloves of garlic, about 2 tablespoons of some minced ginger root, 1 tablespoon of some unsalted butter, and 1 tablespoon of some granulated sugar. You'll also require about 1 tablespoon of some dried sultanas, some dried raisins, or even some dried prunes, a few sticks of some cinnamon, about 1 tablespoon of some peppercorns, and about 1 tablespoon of some garam masala. You'll also require some onions, 1 particular bunch of course chopped into half moon shapes, which you're basically going to be using for a small salad. And you'll also require another batch of onions, which is of course finely chopped, which we're going to be incorporating into a biryani with of course the addition of those 2 pieces of chilies. You'll also require 2 medium-sized eggs and about 100 grams of some goat meat, preferably one that is off the bone and already cut into 1-inch cubes. You'll also require some fresh coriander, some salt to season with, and about 1 cup of some plain yogurt. You'll also require some oil to cook with, some peppercorns which we'll be crushing into that, some turmeric powder, some beef stock, and last but not least, about 1 cup of rice, basmati preferably, which of course has already been soaked in some water for about 2 hours. This is of course to aid in making sure that we get the rice just perfect. But before we begin, I will of course give you this chance to sit back, relax and unwind, and we'll catch you after a short break. And now all you need to do is proceed to add the rice to the pot. So as Eunice does so, very important that I also give you an insight of what the pot looks like. If you can be able to see it from the cameras, should actually be nice and dry at the bottom of your pan. And this is particularly going to give 2 beautiful results by allowing the browning effect or the Maillard effect to take place. Welcome back viewers. If you're just getting time to tune into the show with us this evening, we pretty much haven't missed out on a lot. We began by introducing the ingredients, and before that I introduced Eunice, who's going to be the guest on the show. Some of you may have of course seen her before, but I managed to convince her yet again to join us for another episode. And now we're going to begin this process very simply. We're going to begin by making the base for the biryani, which is of course the stew. So we will begin by adding our butter into our pan. So be sure to have a nice big sizable pan for this particular process, for the fact that you will of course need quite a bit of room to cook all the ingredients together. And all you need to do, begin the process by melting your butter. And to that we're going to be incorporating a few of the other ingredients. Right, so I'll just take that away. Right, so as soon as your butter is melted, proceed to add your peppercorns and your cinnamon sticks, and you can proceed to mix that through with a spoon right up until you begin to get that beautiful aroma coming through. And to that, as you continue to brown all your ingredients, remember to also add in your garam masala at this stage. And be sure to actually continue to cook this at very low temperature. This is of course to make sure that you don't actually burn the mixture at this stage. because by burning the mixture, it will of course carry a very unpleasant flavor and taste right through the dish. So be sure to always begin this process very slowly by of course heating up your ingredients. And of course what you're looking for as well at this stage is almost a dark brown kind of mixture in your pot. And as soon as you have that, that should trigger the next addition of your ingredients, which is your onions. So Eunice will continue to mix that for us. To that we're also going to add our minced ginger.
So I actually thought the white onions are for salads only.
No. You can actually be able to cook
with them, and I'm like, okay,
exactly.
they actually cook.
Yeah, you can actually be able to cook with them, but I would normally recommend, if you're going to be using maybe onions or maybe making a recipe such as this one, an addition of red and white onions in equal amounts will always give a very beautiful flavor. And as soon as that begins to dry up in the pan, proceed to deglaze by adding a little bit of some beef stock. Then you'll continue to mix that through. And as we do so, we're also going to proceed to pound down our garlic. So into a mortar, proceed to add your garlic cloves and a bit of salt. And using your pestle, proceed to mash them down completely. Making sure, of course, to try and pound them down completely right up until none of your cloves of garlic is visible to the eye. And all you need to do now is proceed to pound down your mixture. And as soon as you have all your cloves completely pounded down, proceed to clean your pestle by rubbing it on the sides of your mortar. And proceed to add that to your pan with your onion and your garlic. Right, so proceed to mix that through. And remember, at this stage, always try and make sure that the mixture is as dry as possible, but be sure also to make sure that it also doesn't burn. You can also add a little bit of some oil. This is of course to make sure that your mixture is not too dry. And remember, we're also going to be incorporating a bit of chilies, but remember, by adding your chilies early in the process, it will of course continue to make the dish quite spicy. So be sure to add this a little later in the process. And this will take us to the next step, which is of course adding our meat. So proceed to add your goat into your pan and continue to brown the mixture continuously. And while doing so, we're also going to continue to finish off the very simple onion salad that we're going to be serving with this dish. So into another bowl, proceed to add, can put it here. Okay. Into another bowl, we'll proceed to add our onions. We're also going to add our sugar.
Why do you add sugar?
Now, one thing that the sugar is going to do is actually going to be able to be dissolved with a bit of lemon. And this is basically to cut the sharpness of the onion. So by adding sugar, we're pretty much going to be able to overpower the flavor of the onions, and they're actually going to be a little sweet.
Okay.
So once your sugar is in, proceed to squeeze in the juice of one whole lemon. Making sure, of course, to use a sieve for this process. This will, of course, make sure that you don't actually have any seeds incorporated in your mixture. Right, you can give that a mix once more. And of course, at this stage, your pan will continue to stay very dry. I do recommend that you actually keep it that way right up until your meat is, of course, perfectly browned and dark in color, of course. Once you've added your lemons, proceed to discard the seeds. And you can also proceed to finish that off by chopping in some fresh coriander leaves. Now this will do two things. It's actually going to give it a very nice flavor, and it's also going to give it a beautiful color. So it's also going to give it a nice, beautiful, uplifting spark of green. So with a sharp knife, proceed to chop your coriander as finely as possible, pressing hard against your chopping board. So we're going to be using coriander two ways for this recipe. We are going to also be incorporating a bit of coriander to the mixture that's already on the pan. So to the bowl with the onions, proceed to add about 2 tablespoons of your fresh coriander. And all you need to do is proceed to give that a mix by hand. And as you mix through, be sure to also squeeze the mixture as you continue. This is of course to aid in making sure that you can actually dissolve your sugar a little faster.
Is there anything else you can add to the salad?
Yes, you can of course add maybe a bit of garlic as well if you prefer, or even a bit of ginger. But due to the fact that we're also trying to keep it very, very flavorful, and also remember this is also to be able to cut the richness of the biryani. We try and keep it as savory as possible so that you can actually have a balance of flavors. Right, so once that is mixed through, you can actually allow this to sit at room temperature right up until you're ready to serve your biryani. Be sure to rinse your hands before you proceed. And just to give our meat a check, it's actually now almost browning, so we're pretty much going to brown that for a little longer, for maybe about another 4 to 5 minutes, taking the total time of the browning process to about 15 minutes in total. And we're going to also be incorporating some of the ingredients that I have to my right, but we will of course be doing so as we continue, which will of course give us just enough time to begin making our rice. So into a pot that already has some boiling water, we're going to begin the process by adding a teaspoon of salt to season the mixture through. And we're also going to be adding a bit of some turmeric powder. This is of course to give the rice a bit of a color. So I'm also going to add a teaspoon of that to your water. Mix that through. And as you allow the water to come to the bubble, proceed to check your rice once more. Remember, the rice should actually be washed at least twice before allowing your rice to soak for about 2 hours. And once that is done, proceed to pour out the water from your bowl. And now all you need to do is proceed to add the rice to the pot. So as Eunice does so, very important that I also give you an insight of what the pot looks like. If you can be able to see it from the cameras, should actually be nice and dry at the bottom of your pan. And this is particularly going to give 2 beautiful results by allowing the browning effect to, or the maillard effect to take place. This is also going to build a nice beautiful flavor in your pan. And right at the point where your meat has just pretty much begun to turn brown, we'll proceed to add our beef stock. Making sure, of course, that the stock does touch the very highest point of your mixture. And all we're going to do now is allow this to continue to simmer undisturbed for about another 5 to 10 minutes, giving us just enough time to make sure that the meat is cooked through. Perfect. Right, and as we continue now to allow for the rice to cook, very important that I also mention some very, very handy tools that you will require for the next process. So I'm going to be, of course, moving this mixture into the oven once the rice is cooked and once the meat is cooked. I will, of course, take you through the very, very simple process of layering all your ingredients and take you through the process of baking that in the oven. So be sure to actually have an oven-proof dish of any particular kind. It doesn't particularly have to be clear. It can actually be ceramic or even clay. And this is pretty much going to be going into the oven with the whole of our mixture. So this should actually give you just enough time to be able to prepare the rest of your ingredients. Now, something also to mention, I'm also going to be incorporating some vanilla, or rather some plain yogurt into this recipe. You can, of course, use vanilla if you're not able to find plain yogurt. It won't really affect your recipe too much. But the yogurt is basically to give the biryani that beautiful velvety texture that you always have at the end of the dish. It's actually a very, very handy ingredient, and I would recommend, if you're pretty much not going to be able to use any particular dairies for this recipe, maybe of course not allowed by your doctor to actually consume any milk products, you can also alternatively switch to coconut milk or even soya milk, which is also a very, very beautiful alternative to substitute this with. But as we continue to allow that to cook, we will of course take a quick break, and when we do come back, I'll take you through the process of finishing off this very, very simple dish, and I'll take you through also some beautiful serving suggestions at the end of the process. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. So I'm just going to slide that in and push it right to the very end. And all you need to do now is set your timer for about 10 minutes and allow that to continue to cook. And as soon as that is done, we're pretty much going to take it out and proceed to plating. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are with us before we took the break, we pretty much began by making the biryani base, and we've also finished making our rice. Now, as for the rice, this pretty much cooked until it was done. We took it out and rinsed it under some cold running water, and it's actually been sitting on the sieve, just cooling off and draining any excess water. So all you're left to do now is proceed to assemble your biryani. But very, very importantly, there's some key ingredients that still have to go into the dish. So we're going to finish off our dish by adding some fresh coriander, and of course this has to happen while the heat is completely off. This is of course to make sure that you don't actually split your yogurt while mixing in the process. So Eunice will help us in adding that to your dish. And we're also going to be adding our sultanas, which I had mentioned a little earlier. You can be able to replace this for some raisins or even some prunes, depending on which one's actually available to you. Thank you. So all we're left to do now is proceed to give that a quick mix. And this is of course going to take us into the next process of assembling our biryani and of course adding that to the oven. So Eunice, I'll ask you to mix that through for us. And while she does so, I'm just going to grab our dish as I mentioned a little earlier. I'm also going to transfer my rice into a bowl at this stage. Right, now all you're left to do is pretty much begin by layering your dish in layer after layer. So I'm going to begin by adding some rice to the dish. So proceed to add about a third of your rice and layer it, spread it out along the base of your oven-proof dish. Also to mention, you don't actually have to use the same exact one. You can of course be able to replace or substitute this for a ceramic one or even a clay one. So in goes your rice. Now we'll of course proceed to add our biryani mixture, but very importantly, remember to season with a bit of some salt and mix it through once more. And right after you've done your rice, you're pretty much going to proceed to layer your you're going to begin to layer your meat immediately after. So I'm just going to grab a few ladlefuls of our biryani mixture, and I'm just going to spread it along the layer, or rather to cover the layer of the rice, making sure of course that you touch each of the corners before spreading it evenly, making sure that it is nice and evenly distributed within your bowl or your dish of choice. And of course, proceed to scoop the last and final bit of your sauce. And once done, using a spoon, proceed to layer that very, very gently. And the last and final process is basically the rice, which I'll allow you to do for us. So all you need to do is pretty much remember the basics of pretty much layering your rice and then your biryani mixture and then your rice at the very end. This is of course to make sure that once this comes out of the oven, it actually is going to be very simple for you to be able to scoop the mixture very simply, having both layers of rice at the top, a little bit crispier than the layer at the bottom. It will of course also allow for the biryani mixture to pretty much combine with the rice in flavors. And it's actually going to have a nice, beautiful, harmonic kind of aftertaste as soon as it comes out of the oven. Right, I'll take that away from you. Right now, very important to also mention at this stage, make sure your oven is already preheated. So this is of course set at 200 degrees. We are going to be throwing this in the oven for anywhere between 10 to 12 minutes. This is of course just to give the biryani just a bit of time to continue to cook. Proceed to cover that with some aluminium foil. And very, very importantly, before that goes into the oven, always remember to prick a small hole right at the center of your aluminium. This is of course to aid in allowing for any excess steam in your bowl to actually escape and keep the dish nice and crispy on the very top as soon as it comes out of the oven. So I'm just going to slide that in and push it right to the very end. And all you need to do now is set your timer for about 10 minutes and allow that to continue to cook. And as soon as that is done, we're pretty much going to take it out and proceed to plating. So do not touch that dial. We'll see you in a little bit. So give that a taste as well.
Very tasty.
It's very tasty.
Yeah.
And you can actually be able to get the balance of all the flavors.
Yeah, they balanced out everything.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So that gives us, that of course gives you the very simple process of making a biryani. Welcome back, viewers. If you're just tuning in, you may have missed out on all of the processes that have taken place on the show today, but do remember, by subscribing and liking our YouTube channel, that's BrandPlus TV Kenya, you should be able to recap on this and many other beautiful recipes that you can be able to try out by yourself in your very own home kitchen. But now that we've come to the last and final part of the dish, I will of course begin by taking out our biryani from the oven. Now this has been in the oven for about 15 minutes in total. I'm just going to set it on the counter. And we're just going to allow that for a few seconds to cool down. And while we do so, I will of course take you through the last and final process of this dish, which is of course frying up one whole egg. So into a pan, add a bit of some oil. And all you need to do now is proceed to crack your egg in and allow that to cook until beautifully crispy on the sides, giving you just enough time to be able to finish off your dish.
That looks lovely.
It looks good, yeah?
Yeah.
So pretty much all you're left to do is proceed to serve this. And on the simplest way to actually do so is always begin by moving the mixture almost to the center of the bowl, or pull it from the sides of your bowl and proceed to scoop from the outside in. So of course this is just to make sure that it doesn't spill over. Okay. So by tilting your spoon right from the side like that, you should actually be able to lift a beautiful layering of a bit of rice at the bottom, a bit of meat right over it, and some rice right over the top, and proceed to plate that on the plate of choice. So I'm going to serve about 4 little spoons of the mixture. This should actually be able to serve at least 1 full adult portion. Next up, we'll proceed to remove the egg from the oil. So pretty much all you need to do is cook your egg sunny side and proceed to lift that very, very simply and finish by placing that right over the top of your biryani. This will of course take you through the last and final process, which is of course your salad. So give your salad a quick mix. I will of course allow Eunice to give that a taste and tell us what you find, what particular characteristics you find from the salad. Still nice and crunchy. Is it too salty?
No.
It actually balances quite well.
Balances quite
so
well.
you can actually now be able to see what the sugar manages to do.
Yeah.
So similar to the way you'd actually soak your onions after chopping them up, the sugar will actually do the same process for you. So instead of having to rinse your onions and then drain them and then serve them, the sugar will actually take the bitterness out completely. And all you're left to do is to toss that mixture in your bowl and proceed to serve that on a bowl on the side. And you can of course finish that very, very simply by slicing 2 whole chilies. And you can proceed to just drop those right over the top of your salad, which should actually make it a little easier for you to spot the chili, especially when serving this onto a table with a big number of guests. So we've of course come to the last and final part of the show. I will of course allow you once more to taste the biryani for us and tell us how that is. So give that a taste as well.
It's very tasty.
It's very tasty.
Yeah.
And you can actually be
I
able
love
to
the
get
way
the balance of all the flavors.
Yeah, they balanced out everything.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So that gives us, that of course gives you the very simple process of making a biryani. And as I mentioned as well, and for the viewers at home, this is of course a very simple technique that you can incorporate that is of course a little less time consuming and of course also a little easier on the pockets. You can of course be able to go online and you'll be able to find some more complex kind of recipes that may of course call for an addition of ingredients. But this particular technique should actually be, you should actually be able to achieve a very, very simple biryani by following those very, very simple steps. Now, we're going to be wrapping up the show, but as I do so, I will of course remind you there is a 5-digit code on the screens. Remember, you can also be part and parcel of the show by texting that 5-digit code, which is of course a toll-free number. Do write your name, a bit of a description of yourself, and something that you're willing or pretty much looking forward to learning on the show, and we'll be more than happy to get back to you. And you, just like Eunice, may actually be the next guest on our show. But for now, I will leave you with that small message of goodbye, wishing you a very, very lovely evening. And until the next episode, do stay blessed and see you soon.